Welcome, friends, to our latest video, where terror lurks in the darkest corners of a seemingly tranquil farm. Today, we will delve into chilling stories that go beyond what meets the eye, where the silence of the rural night hides dark secrets and horrifying surprises. Join our community of horror and suspense enthusiasts by subscribing to our channel. Don't forget to activate the bell so you won't miss any of our videos. And if you're enjoying what you see, leave a like. It helps us bring even more terrifying content to you. Now, without further ado, let's unravel the secrets hiding in the shadows of the farm. Brace yourselves, for the truth behind these stories may be scarier than you imagine. That summer, the tranquility of Sunset Farm was disturbed by an enigmatic presence. Mateus, a 25-year-old, managed the farm inherited from my parents, living a peaceful and routine life, until something strange began to happen. It was a sultry Tuesday night when I first saw him. Returning from the barn, it was past 10, and something caught my attention on the dirt road winding to the farm's entrance. It was a silhouette, a human figure, standing, almost merging with the darkness. I remained still, watching. The stranger seemed to stare fixedly at the house but didn't move. I felt a growing restlessness within me. I decided to ignore it, thinking it was someone lost or a local drunk. But the next night, he was there again, closer this time. Though still a distance away, I could see his form better. It was a man, tall, wearing what seemed like a battered overcoat. His face remained in the shadow, making it impossible to identify his features. A feeling of discomfort overcame me. I mentioned it to some friends in the village, but they just laughed, saying I was seeing things due to the farm's isolation. The appearances became frequent. Every night, there he was, the same distance, the same posture, staring fixedly at the house. I started losing sleep, my imagination creating frightening scenarios. I decided to confront him. On a particularly starry night, I took a flashlight and walked down the dirt road. As I approached, my heart raced. About 10 meters away, I stopped. The stranger remained immobile, as if sculpted in stone. "Who are you? What do you want here?" I shouted. There was no response. Suddenly, a cold wind blew, and in the blink of an eye, he disappeared. There was no one else on the road. Astonished, I ran back to the house. Since that night, he never appeared again. But the mystery remained, tormenting my mind. Who was that stranger? A ghost, a lost traveler, or just a hallucination provoked by the isolation and monotonous routine of the farm? Unanswered questions that kept me tossing in bed, seeking explanation for the inexplicable. As days passed, life resumed its normal course, but that experience never left my head. I began to inquire the elders in the village, seeking some legend or story that might explain what happened. That's when Mr. Antonio, the oldest resident of the place, told me a story that chilled my blood. Many years ago, before my family settled at Sunset Farm, a mysterious stranger appeared in the area. He walked the dirt roads at night, never spoke to anyone, always observing houses from a distance. One day, he simply vanished without a trace. Since then, his presence is occasionally felt, like a dark reminder of those old days. That story left me even more intrigued. Was the stranger I saw the same wanderer, somehow tied to that land? Or was it all just a coincidence, a product of my fertile imagination fed by local tales and legends? With every shadow cast by the moon, every whisper of the wind, I found myself looking at the dirt road, half expecting, half fearing to see the figure of that stranger again. But he never reappeared. In those childhood days spent on the old horse farm, bordering the vast and mysterious forest, life seemed like a constant adventure. The river, with its calm and cold waters, marked the natural boundary between our land and the environmental reserve that extended beyond. We, my 4 younger siblings and I, essentially lived off quarter horse breeding, and our days unfolded amidst horseback riding and explorations around the area. It was in the early 90s, a time when the world seemed much larger and more mysterious, that my story of terror on the farm began. My siblings and I, along with our neighbor, a boy a few years older and with a daring spirit, used to venture into the dense woods surrounding our property. Forbidden by our parents to cross the river, the attraction to the unknown only grew, pushing us beyond the allowed limits. One day, when I was 13, this parental prohibition lost its meaning in front of a disturbing discovery. It was almost dusk when we decided to cross the river. The forest was denser and darker than ever, and as we advanced, a supernatural silence seemed to envelop us. It was my youngest brother who first noticed a strange phenomenon: a small pine grove, with several trees broken, all pointing in the same direction, as if a gigantic whirlwind had passed through there. The feeling of fear was instantaneous. Something about that scene was deeply wrong, unnatural. But our neighbor, always eager for adventures and mysteries, insisted that we explore the place. Despite growing fear, we followed the direction indicated by the broken trees until we reached a clearing. The exact moment we entered the clearing, a noise echoed from the pine grove, as if something large was moving in our direction. Fear turned into terror, but my neighbor, among scornful laughter, urged my brothers to investigate. I, driven by a survival instinct, decided to return alone to the main trail. The distance between us increased, and I could see my brothers and neighbor about 50 meters from me, when a series of horrifying screams tore through the forest silence. I turned just in time to see my neighbor being thrown through the air like a rag doll. The screams of my brothers were mixed in panic and confusion. Then, what was chasing us revealed itself. An immense creature, with black fur and eyes reflecting a sinister glow, emerged from the shadows. Over 3 meters tall, it was a terrifying sight, a grotesque fusion of human and beast. Its scream, a sound that reverberated in our bones, was a deadly warning. We ran like never before, driven by pure terror. The creature, for some reason, did not pursue us, but its scream still echoed in our ears. Exhausted and terrified, we collapsed on the ground, already near the safety of our farm. My neighbor was seriously injured, with a broken collarbone. We made up a story about a hunting accident to explain his injuries, knowing the truth was unbelievable. This traumatic experience was etched in us, a constant reminder of the horror hiding in that forest. Today, at 41, I still remember that day with frightening clarity. My neighbor never spoke about the incident again, and we stayed away from that part of the forest, respecting the unspoken warning from that monstrous creature. The farm and its memories remain, but that day transformed my childhood of adventures into a memory of pure terror. I grew up on a family farm, a legacy from my grandparents, a place that has always been my sanctuary, my home. The farm was a haven of peace, where the sounds of nature blended with the nostalgia of my childhood memories. The chirping of crickets at dusk, the aroma of fresh hay, and the gentle sounds of animals always brought me comfort. It was a place where I felt connected to my roots, a link to the generations past who had cultivated the same land. Over the years, I made some changes to the farm, but its essence remained the same. I loved the solitude of rural spaces, the freedom of open fields, and the predictable routine of my days. The farm was more than just a piece of land. It was an intrinsic part of me, intertwined with my memories and emotions. Every night, I would make a round of the farm to ensure the animals' safety and that everything was locked up. But on one particular night, while passing near an old abandoned barn, an unusual noise caught my attention. It was the sound of crying, and initially, I thought it might be an animal in distress. But as I approached, the dim light of my flashlight revealed the truth. It was a boy, seemingly about 6 or 7 years old, in a deplorable state. His clothes were torn, he was covered in dirt, and he looked terrified. I tried to approach cautiously, fearing to scare him even more, but he remained disturbed. He didn't respond to my questions, seemingly in shock. I hesitated to call the police. Something told me to wait. The presence of that boy on my farm, in the middle of the night, and his strange behavior, none of it made sense. I decided to take him to my house to offer some comfort, but during the walk, I felt a strange sensation of being watched. Every sound, every movement of the leaves gave me chills. Inside the house, the boy remained silent, just staring blankly at the ceiling. I tried to talk to him, but it was futile. The night dragged on, and the atmosphere of the house seemed charged with an indescribable tension. When I finally managed to put him to sleep in the guest room, I thought I might rest. But when I checked the room later, I discovered that the boy had disappeared, the window open. I ran outside, calling for him, but it was as if he had evaporated. I searched the farm unsuccessfully and, impulsively, entered the forest. My search through the forest was frantic and confused. When the dawn light began to appear, I came across an improvised grave, marked with a stone. On it was engraved the name of a boy with birth and death dates. I had never seen that grave before, despite living on that land for over a decade. After reporting the incident to the authorities, they were as perplexed as I was. They searched the area, asked questions, but nothing was found. The grave remained a mystery. Since that night, the atmosphere of the farm changed. I felt as if my reality had been shaken, my mind unable to process what happened. The farm was never the same for me. Even common sounds, like the wind hitting the barn, reminded me of that boy. I considered moving, but something kept me there. The farm was my home, and I wouldn't let fear drive me away. Time passed, but the discomfort never completely disappeared. And, occasionally, on the quietest nights, I swear I can hear a distant sound coming from the depths of the forest, the unmistakable crying of that little boy. I grew up on a family farm, a legacy from my grandparents, a place that has always been my sanctuary, my home. The farm was a haven of peace, where the sounds of nature blended with the nostalgia of my childhood memories. The chirping of crickets at dusk, the aroma of fresh hay, and the gentle sounds of animals always brought me comfort. It was a place where I felt connected to my roots, a link to the generations past who had cultivated the same land. Over the years, I made some changes to the farm, but its essence remained the same. I loved the solitude of rural spaces, the freedom of open fields, and the predictable routine of my days. The farm was more than just a piece of land. It was an intrinsic part of me, intertwined with my memories and emotions. Every night, I would make a round of the farm to ensure the animals' safety and that everything was locked up. But on one particular night, while passing near an old abandoned barn, an unusual noise caught my attention. It was the sound of crying, and initially, I thought it might be an animal in distress. But as I approached, the dim light of my flashlight revealed the truth. It was a boy, seemingly about 6 or 7 years old, in a deplorable state. His clothes were torn, he was covered in dirt, and he looked terrified. I tried to approach cautiously, fearing to scare him even more, but he remained disturbed. He didn't respond to my questions, seemingly in shock. I hesitated to call the police. Something told me to wait. The presence of that boy on my farm, in the middle of the night, and his strange behavior, none of it made sense. I decided to take him to my house to offer some comfort, but during the walk, I felt a strange sensation of being watched. Every sound, every movement of the leaves gave me chills. Inside the house, the boy remained silent, just staring blankly at the ceiling. I tried to talk to him, but it was futile. The night dragged on, and the atmosphere of the house seemed charged with an indescribable tension. When I finally managed to put him to sleep in the guest room, I thought I might rest. But when I checked the room later, I discovered that the boy had disappeared, the window open. I ran outside, calling for him, but it was as if he had evaporated. I searched the farm unsuccessfully and, impulsively, entered the forest. My search through the forest was frantic and confused. When the dawn light began to appear, I came across an improvised grave, marked with a stone. On it was engraved the name of a boy with birth and death dates. I had never seen that grave before, despite living on that land for over a decade. After reporting the incident to the authorities, they were as perplexed as I was. They searched the area, asked questions, but nothing was found. The grave remained a mystery. Since that night, the atmosphere of the farm changed. I felt as if my reality had been shaken, my mind unable to process what happened. The farm was never the same for me. Even common sounds, like the wind hitting the barn, reminded me of that boy. I considered moving, but something kept me there. The farm was my home, and I wouldn't let fear drive me away. Time passed, but the discomfort never completely disappeared. And, occasionally, on the quietest nights, I swear I can hear a distant sound coming from the depths of the forest, the unmistakable crying of that little boy. There's a saying that the most terrifying things are not the monsters we see, but those we don't. This never made more sense to me than during the 2 weeks when our peaceful life on the farm was transformed into a nightmare. The beginning of this dark period was marked by a peculiar event. Every night, at 3 a.m., our old rotary dial phone rang incessantly. My husband, Joao, and I, married for 45 years, have lived a life dedicated to each other and our farm, which spans over 200,000 square meters. This land, which has been in Joao's family for generations, was where we raised our children and now enjoy the peace of retirement. The phone, a relic of the past, had always been there, a connection to previous generations, more decorative than functional in an era dominated by cell phones and the internet. The first time the phone rang, we thought it was a mistake, maybe someone who dialed the wrong number. But when the calls repeated, every night at the same time, we began to worry. Whenever we answered, we were greeted with a disturbing silence. One night, Joao answered and heard a slow, chilling breath on the other end of the line. He was convinced that it was not human, but something from another world. From then on, our farm became a scene of inexplicable events. The barn doors closed on their own, our docile cattle became agitated and fearful, our crops withered inexplicably overnight. Tools were found in places where we hadn't left them, and the wind chimes on our porch rang frenetically, even on windless nights. The most terrifying was when our tractor, turned off, started by itself and destroyed the chicken coop, although, miraculously, the chickens survived. Despite all this madness, we never considered abandoning our farm. It was our home, our life. We thought of all possibilities, from pranks to personal resentments, but we knew something deeper was happening. We sought help from the authorities and a priest, but none of this alleviated the terror that had settled in. Nights were the worst. We heard footsteps outside, knocking on the door, but there was never anyone there. We began to sleep in shifts, one watching while the other rested. And then, as suddenly as it began, everything stopped. The phone ceased its calls, the cattle calmed down, the crops recovered. It was as if a dark cloud had dissipated. Life returned to normal, and our farm was once again filled with laughter and joy with the visit of children and grandchildren. We decided to keep the old phone as a reminder of the 2 dark weeks we survived. The years passed, and despite never talking about that period, the memories persisted. We were startled by any strange sound, and the sight of the phone caused us discomfort. My brother and I grew up on an old farm, a house that seemed to embrace the seasons with its porches and rooms connected to the central living room. That summer, I was 14 and my brother was 11. Our mother was out, resolving some issue, and the 2 of us were in the living room doing our homework. He was near the stove, and I was lying on the sofa, immersed in reading. The house was old and had its own noises and whispers, but that night something different happened. I heard footsteps on the porch, heavy and firm. Strangely, I didn't see my mother's car lights, nor did I hear the sound of a vehicle approaching, just the mysterious footsteps that stopped near the front door. I froze, caught between curiosity and fear. If I got up, I could see who was outside through the door window, but that would also mean being seen. Any word exchanged with my brother could be heard outside, where someone, perhaps, was watching us hidden in the darkness. My heart raced uncontrollably as I pondered my options. The person was standing in front of the house's only door, which, out of habit, we left unlocked. Thinking of grabbing a knife from the kitchen meant being seen. The house was too small to hide effectively. I decided the best strategy was to pretend ignorance of the person outside and prepare for the worst. After a few tense minutes, the footsteps ceased. I began to calm down, questioning whether my imagination had played a trick on me. But 20 minutes later, when my mother arrived and the headlights lit up the room, I ran outside, eager to share my fear with her. Before I could speak, she asked who had left the backyard faucet on. Fear engulfed me again. This faucet was peculiar, standing waist-high with the spout facing upwards. It was our improvised drinking fountain and source of play. That night, the water was gushing upwards, as if someone had intentionally turned it on. Someone was there, watching the house where only 2 children were present, without any adults around. The person didn't enter but left a clear warning that they could have. It was a silent but terrifying invasion of our privacy and security. In the following days, the feeling of vulnerability haunted us. My brother and I became nervous at dusk, every sound startling us. We began to lock all doors and windows, a novelty in that house that had always welcomed the country breeze. My mother, trying to reassure us, suggested that it might have been a wanderer or someone lost looking for help. But deep down, I knew there was something more sinister in that nocturnal visit. The farm, once a place of freedom and adventure, had become a scene of uncertainty and fear. As time passed, the details of that night faded, but the sensation of terror remained. Whenever I return to the farm, even now as an adult, I can't help but look at that old faucet in the yard and wonder who was there that night and what their intentions were. I work as an elderly caregiver, and I spent about a year and a half taking care of Maria, a 94-year-old lady with Alzheimer's. Maria had recently moved to her daughter's house, located on a remote farm in the countryside. During my stay, I witnessed events that made me question the boundaries between reality and the unexplained. Maria often spoke about the presence of her deceased sister, mother, and husband in the house or outside. These hallucinations are common in dementia patients, so initially they didn't concern me. However, Maria had a peculiar fear of the forest surrounding the farm, warning me about dangerous animals and the risk of getting lost. She also mentioned that her mother and husband would pass through her body sometimes, an unsettling comment that I attributed to her condition. After 6 months of working with her, I began to notice changes in her behavior. Maria would spend nights wandering the hallways, a common phenomenon known as a sundowning in people with Alzheimer's. However, she started frequenting a specific window in the house where she would laugh and converse as if interacting with someone outside. When I asked her, she would respond vaguely and confused. One winter, we were abruptly awakened by the house alarm. After a thorough check, we discovered that Maria had disappeared. In panic, I went outside to look for her in the snow, while her daughter continued the search inside the house. Strangely, there were no footprints in the snow. About 15 minutes later, when I was almost giving up due to the cold, I found Maria outside the window where she used to talk. Surprisingly, there were no footprints around her, and she wasn't cold to the touch, despite the freezing cold. After that incident, Maria's nighttime visits to the window became more frequent, but her behavior changed from cheerful to agitated. She would argue and shout at the window as if in conflict with someone invisible. Eventually, she stopped visiting the window, and one of her last conversations was an enigmatic request for me to let her go. These events left me deeply unsettled. I began to question whether Maria's visions were merely a result of her condition or if something else was happening. The farm, once a place of tranquility, had become a setting of mystery and anxiety. The nights were accompanied by a palpable sense of presence, as if the ghosts of Maria's past were somehow interacting with her. Over time, I began to feel a strange connection between Maria's visions and the forest around the farm. It seemed that the trees and the winds carried ancient secrets, whispers that only Maria could hear and respond to. The nights on the farm turned into a theater of shadows and voices, where the line between the real and the supernatural became incredibly thin. Although Maria eventually passed away, her connection to the farm and her mysterious nights at the window remained with me. To this day, when I think back to that period, I shiver at the memory of the nighttime whispers and the invisible figures that seemed to inhabit that place. The experience taught me that sometimes life's deepest mysteries reside in untold stories, forgotten corners, and the lost gazes of those who live between the past and the present, in a reality that many of us will never fully understand. We hope you have enjoyed this expedition into the heart of rural terror, and that the stories told have piqued your curiosity and fueled your imagination. If you liked what you heard, don't forget to leave your like. It motivates us to continue exploring the darkest corners of the world and bring you more content. And if you haven't subscribed to our channel yet, do it now and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future videos. Thank you for joining us until the end of this video. And remember, it will always be a pleasure to be here with you.